My friend Sonia had recently qualified as a counsellor and attended a seminar where she was taught to use buttons in symbol work to help people see themselves and their circumstances more clearly. It was a technique that I found very helpful in my own work when I too qualified as a counsellor, working for the NHS for some 18 years until my retirement in 2020, just as it happened at the beginning of lockdown. Sonia and I, over the years, had done a lot together, learning to spin and dye our wool, to do counted cross-stitch, knitting and embroidery. We became friends in London, and after moving to opposite ends of the country, corresponded with each other regularly. She had come to stay for a few days on holiday, and as usual, I wanted her to share with me what she'd learned. On the table was a jar of buttons, which she tipped out and began arranging. I looked up and down the rows and saw amongst others a small black button, a large red button, a blue plastic one, different size brown leather ones that would suit an Aran cardigan or tweed jacket, in fact just an ordinary mixed variety, such as many people have at home. I've always liked buttons and enjoyed looking at the assortment in front of me. I wondered what was coming next. She asked me to choose one that represented me. I quickly and instinctively chose the square mother-of-pearl button with cut-off corners. This was me, aged about 10 years old. I was shiny in many different ways. I felt a bit special. I enjoyed life and was happy, I said, turning the button between my fingers. I felt quite amazed that I was able to relate to a button. And when Sonia asked if there was anything else, I found myself adding, "Yes, it's the shape of it. I was having the corners knocked off me." I was surprised by what I was saying, and I also found myself feeling a little angry. This started me thinking, had I felt pressured by others? What had happened to me, the real me, as I'd grown? I decided to write about my life to see if I could find out. Where better to start than at the beginning? This is what I chose for my dad. And there's lots of reasons for that. You know, my dad, again, was quite shiny. He was like warm melted chocolate. He was always there for you. He was always just so, I don't know, such a lovely, lovely man. But boy, could he go off on tangents. Could he take you down this road or that road or that road? And you think, hang on a minute. What have I said yes to? And I'm sure my mum felt like that. So that was my dad, full of ideas, full of different plans. We always likened him to Toad of Toad Hall. You know, there he was. If he wasn't driving a horse and cart, he was driving a car, or he was doing this or he was doing that. And this was my mum. It's a knitted button. Well, knitted over the top. Rather a nice idea. But that was my mum. And then this is my brother. There we are. It's a little shank button. And it's little bits of mother of pearl it's like wood. So it's rather beautiful, but it's very unusual. And that's how I felt having a brother. My childhood was quite ordinary, nothing special, I want to say. But of course, on reflection, it was quite special. I was loved by a mum and dad who were doing their best to make life comfortable for me and who wanted to give me the best opportunities life could give. The war had finished 4 years earlier, sweet rationing was abolished in April, and although there was still food rationing, things were beginning to settle down and hopes were high. I loved bright days and sunshine, and it was just that kind of day when I was born. My background, when you look way back, is varied, For instance, a census of 1871 shows my fourth great-grandmother, Lydia Peck, being born in Bristol, but now living with Mary, Harriet, Anna, her daughters, and Annie Jemima, her granddaughter, my great-grandmother, in Ossleton Street, a main road close to King's Cross Station. Lydia's husband, Samuel Peck, hailed from Norfolk. The Whitmans are from South Cerney, Gloucestershire, and again moved to London. Henry Whitman is 1871 and living at 23 Little Clarendon Street. This street in Somerstown had been described by Charles Booth in his Survey of London in 1898 as a narrow thoroughfare of bad repute, the worst spot in the immediate neighbourhood, and a good many prostitutes and amateurish thieves are living here. The local name for the street is Little Hell. In 1879, Henry marries Annie Jemima in Somerstown, St Pancras. Henry in 1881 was a tallow melter and chandler of candles. They lived at Pleasant Grove, and Dickens described this in his book, My Mutual Friend. He says, between Battle Bridge and that part of the Holloway district was a tract of suburban Sahara, where tiles and bricks were burnt, bones were boiled, carpets were beat, rubbish was shot, dogs were fought, and dust was heaped by contractors. This was where my nan Lydia lived as a small child. Lydia was born on the 22nd of June, 1884, one of 8 children. Her mum, Annie Jemima, dies aged 38. Mum says she never spoke of any of it. And so my mum's family are from Islington, a stone's throw from St Pancras. My dad's family, on the other hand, hail from, well, Islington, St Pancras, London. Helmet Row, Old Street, getting married in the same church, St Luke's. When I mentioned Sedgwick Street, Homerton, to my dad, he shuddered. Not a good place. It was one of the poorest places between the wars, but now has been regenerated. My great-grandmother, Charlotte Milne, although she was born in the same area, was Scottish. Her father, my great-grandfather, Alexander Milne, a good Scottish name, was born in 1833 and was a printer and came to London from Aberdeen. As a little girl, I always wanted to have the lovely accent. I was thrilled when I found out I was a quarter Scottish. Mum and Dad were 18 when they married. War was raging with a new kind of threat, the doodlebugs and V2 rockets. They'd met at Tottenham Royal, a local dance hall. Dad loved dancing, but Mum said she didn't have the knack. Working since they were 14, dashing down shelters when the siren went off, and on top of that, Mum looking after my nan, who was seriously ill. She says Dad was like a knight in shining armour. He'd get on 3 buses to visit her in Highbury and always produce some tasty treats from under his hat, which meant so much because of rationing. After my nan, Lydia, died in December 1943, aged just 59, their relationship grew stronger, and a year later, on Christmas Eve 1944, they were married. Mum says with such affection that Dad's mum put on a lovely spread for them, neighbours and friends helping with ration coupons. She borrowed her wedding dress from the lady whom she worked for in a paper shop. Her husband was a prisoner of war, and Mum said she was thrilled to lend it to her. Dad borrowed his suit, and they honeymooned in the house opposite as the neighbours had gone away for a couple of days. A strong memory for Mum is sitting on the stairs during her reception and crying. I picture a young girl still grieving for her mum. She says Nanny Cunningham, Dad's nan, said quite kindly but firmly, "Come on, stop that. This is your wedding. All this has been done for you. Enjoy it." Nanny Cunningham had lost so many of her family, her husband, siblings, and 4 children. She knew all about grief and encouraged Mum to enjoy the day. Their married life began in 2 rooms at Highbury, North London. The front room was a bedroom with a single bed. Furniture was rationed and money was tight. The back room was tiny. There was a gas stove, an upright chair, and a shelf, but no sink. Dad put a Victorian vanity sink on the landing with a bucket underneath to catch the water. This had to be collected and emptied on the next landing down. They shared a downstairs toilet. Housing was very short as bombing had taken its toll. Coal was scarce too, which must have been awful in the freezing winter of 1946. They lived like this for 5 years. In 1946, Dad was called into the Air Force and was stationed near Norfolk, and so Mum was on her own for a couple of years. She was 20. Most women had their confinement at home, but Mum's GP trained at University College Hospital and wanted her to register there as their rooms weren't suitable for the birth. This well-funded London teaching hospital was no ordinary one, but as the National Health Service had started the year before, Mum was now entitled to attend. I was due early September 1949, and it was a surprise when at the beginning of August she went into labour. On the evening of Monday the 8th, after having been in labour alone since Sunday afternoon, I arrived and weighed a healthy 6 pounds 5 ounces and was 20 inches long. Strange to think of myself in inches. When I asked her if I was a good baby, she said she didn't really know, as she only saw me at feed times and when Dad visited in the evening for an hour. I thought how sad that I was whisked away, but she said it was a strict regime that she dare not break. No nighttime feeds to deal with, as the babies were bottle-fed in the nursery. It was a nice rest, she said, a 2-week stay. Silver service and treated like royalty. Of course, not all hospitals were like that. University College had been a well-funded teaching hospital, and Mum said although it was now NHS, it hadn't quite converted itself from its private ways. Whilst Mum was in hospital, the council had a sink installed in the small back room. There was now an armchair as well as an upright chair. When we talked about it, I felt so sorry that she was living like this and not having help from her mum. After I had my 2 girls, she was an invaluable support to me. The single bed had gone, and they now slept on a put-you-up. I slept in my pram. She proudly told me that the pram was of the new type that was collapsible. So necessary, as she had to take it up 2 flights of stairs. During lockdown, Mum and I had some super chats, which have become treasures to me. Finding out all these facts is one thing, but knowing that Mum loved cupboards has now become something I have understood so much better. Living in those 2 small rooms for 5 years, and now with a baby, it must have been a challenge. Picking baby up was frowned on. When Mum was home, she often wanted to cuddle me, she said, but that wasn't thought best, so she didn't. She worried if I'd had enough milk and hired some scales and weighed me after every feed. It can't have been easy, hoiking the pram up the stairs, hanging the nappies out between the chimney pots, and Dad taking the washing to the local shop, which sent it to the laundry. It came back damp. No dryers in those days. They christened me Penelope Ann after a character in a book Dad had read. I've managed to buy a copy and can see why he liked the name. As well as describing Penelope, it puts you right amongst the beaches and people of Cornwall, a place he loved and visited time after time. My cousin Tony was born at about the same time, and Nanny wanted us to be christened together. Mum thought this was a good idea, but Dad didn't have a faith. He felt it was a decision to be made when you were old enough to decide for yourself. Finally, it went ahead, and he attended, but didn't take part. Mum and Dad kept a baby record book for me, and I have read that I first crawled at 8 months, but not in the conventional way. I sat on my bottom and shuffled around, and by the time I was a year old, I was toddling. My first word was at 9 months, Dada, and I enjoyed playing with beads in a jar. A far cry from today's industry of baby toys. Reading the baby book is lovely. I remember looking at it when growing up and feeling proud that I had a book about me. Dad wrote it up, and looking at his handwriting, explaining what I did and said, means a lot. When writing about Mum and Dad, I find I often use the word progressive, and for a man to write up a baby book in the early 50s, well, I think it was. Upstairs rooms came available to rent in Naunton Road, which joined Dagenham Road, where Nan and Grandad lived. Mum and Dad still shared their bedroom with me, but now they had a double bed, a sitting room, and another small room served as their bathroom and kitchen. The bath had a removable board which doubled up as a kitchen work surface. "Wasn't that a faff wanting a bath, Mum?" I asked. "No," she replied. "That was luxury." Mum's dad had remarried in 1946, and so she didn't mind the move from North to East London. However, in March 1951, Richard, or Dick as he was known, died. I don't remember him, but Mum says he loved spending time with me. They weren't in Naunton Road too long. Mum said she loved living there, just down the road from Nanny and Dad's sisters, Anne and Joyce. They often went shopping together, and as Anne was only 10 years older than me, we played together. Grandad had found out about properties to rent that would give them a new opportunity for better living, and so we moved to Harlow just before I was 2. I've been back to visit, which was a lovely surprise for me. At the Harlow Museum, I found out why the new town had been built and what life was like there at the time. Mum and Dad must have felt like pioneers, being the first tenants in the flat at 169 Tannisdale. London had been badly bombed. 27,000 houses declared seriously damaged or uninhabitable, and the government of 1946 felt it necessary to introduce the New Towns Act. This wasn't just because of the lack of housing. Over-industrialisation had taken its toll, and bad smogs and poor environment had led to poor health, so planners decided that town and country should be brought together. In 1945, there was a change in leadership as Clement Attlee replaced Winston Churchill as Prime Minister. Attlee and the Labour Party created the National Health Service and nationalised many industries, including coal, gas, and electricity. The New Towns Act was just another example of the socialist changes sweeping Britain, changes which Mum and Dad were happy to be part of. The master plan of Harlow itself was drawn up in 1947 by Sir Frederick Gibbard. The blueprint specified the creation of a central civic area, surrounded by a series of self-sufficient neighbourhoods, each equipped with its own amenities and landscape wedges of green space. The town centre was known as the High and was the first in the country to have a pedestrian precinct. The Lawn, Britain's first tower block, was constructed in 1951. Harlow's village population was 4,500, and in 1952 the figure was likely to rise to 80,000. Harlow New Town was built alongside rather than around the village, so you can visit Old Harlow, which remains village-like and has 2 Grade 1 listed buildings. The M11 was built in the 1970s, so from a village, Harlow escalated. My flat is in a part which was designated a conservation area in 1987 and near to Old Harlow. Photos of me outside Tannisdale showed that it was still very much under construction when we moved in the spring of 1952. We had to walk over rough ground to get to the shops, and building was underway in every direction. Mum said it was considered a gift to live there, with most people working in construction or in purpose-built factories. In this new town being created around us, we had a 2-bedroom flat. It had a balcony, large windows, a fully equipped kitchen and bathroom, living room, and 2 bedrooms. To cap it all, the countryside was on our doorstep. Dad still carried on working in London, and I didn't see him much. A vague recollection is his car, a small Austin 7. His friend said the birds could fly faster. I remember standing on the running board, which at some point fell off. It was exciting. With family away in London, I had an imaginary friend. She was called Matilda. Mum said she'd often find me under the table in conversation. I still like to chat. I started young by the sounds of it. Pictures of me outside Tannisdale show that it was still very much under construction when we moved there. We had to walk over rough ground to get to the shops, and building was underway in every direction. I loved the small balcony we had, and Mum said I often slept on a little bed out in the fresh air. Mum worked at the local bookies until just after lunch, when she collected me from school. She also went around canvassing, asking people if they would like to subscribe to a new mother and baby magazine called Mother. Through this, she met some new mums, and from the sound of her recollections, she enjoyed living at Harlow. They made friends with a couple who were vegans. Apparently, they wouldn't have cotton curtains because of the conditions around cotton picking. Mum and Dad became vegetarians, and later they became naturists as well. As I say, very progressive. My first memory was when I was about 3, and I was helping Mum to polish, and I broke a vase. The photograph of this time shows me with my hair done up in a turban and knickers drooping down. Elastic was susceptible to stretching after a hot wash. I crept into the corner and cried. I put the duster up to my nose, and I can smell the polish even now. Mum gave me a hug and laughed. "Don't worry," she said, "it's only a vase." I don't remember Mum ever getting cross with me. She told me that if I was naughty, her way of dealing with me was to send me to my room and ask me to think about things. I can remember this, but no, I have always loved my bedroom wherever I have lived, so perhaps I enjoyed these forays. I do know I always wanted to stay at home with her. It felt so safe and warm. The button I chose for Mum was a yellow knitted one, soft, homemade and sunny. Mum was always singing, always there for you, and always happy. She cared for people, and I felt she always cared for me. Looking back, at times I took her for granted, but we always got along. In 1952, the Queen came to the throne unexpectedly, and it was a big year for me too, because I started at Fesden School at Parndon Hall. It was a beautiful old house, a couple of miles from home, and closed as a school in the 1990s. It was a private boarding school with painted ceilings, rambling old grounds and woods, and even a ballroom. From a sink on the landing to private school. In 8 years, how life had changed. My teachers' names were Miss Clare and Miss Hinkling. I know Miss Clare, it's been written about her that she taught her children at home, and other people said, would you teach my children, and would you teach my children? And she was a very well-educated woman. Apparently her husband was a stockbroker, and so she looked around for a school that would that she could go to and to take on other people's children. Apparently there were horses there. It was the most special place, the most unusual of schools, and that's where Mum and Dad chose to send me. I don't recall my uniform, but definitely remember my pinny. Mrs. Clare said, put your arms and head in all together. The feeling of having to concentrate and get it right, or I'd end up in a tangle. She held it open and I slipped it on, feeling proud when everything was in the right place. I've loved crossover pinnies ever since and made myself a couple during lockdown. I didn't board, but went on the school bus. Mum came with me at first, but she said I cried when she left, and so they said pop her on the bus, not to worry, because I'd stopped crying by the time I arrived there. So she did. I remember sitting on the long seat and waving goodbye to Mum. I was 3 years old, but quite safe with kindly members of staff. We had a little cot bed that we had a nap on in the afternoon. I remember that, but to be honest, not too much else. Mum told me of an open day when she borrowed a dress and a hat and went with sixpence in her handbag. She laughed when she told me that. One report said, Penny has been much happier at school this term, especially during the last few weeks. She's more independent and takes a lively interest in all activities. I was 3.5. I can relate to taking a lively interest. That trait has stayed with me. Another report said, Penny is a very happy and helpful member of her class. She plays extremely well with the other children and shows great keenness about her work and joins in all class activities. That's what I meant when I chose the mother of pearl button. Happy, lively, and, well, shiny. I can remember reciting a poem at this age, saying it over and over. Old Mr. Muddlecup lost his hat, couldn't find it anywhere, poor old chap. Went down the road and everybody said, Silly Mr. Muddlecup, your hat is on your head. I thought it so funny and laughed every time I said it. I recall being collected one day from school and feeling very special. A dad's friend took me home in their shooting break. I think I was going to a party. I know there were a few children and we all squashed in. I had a summer dress on and was excited. The car had beautiful wood around the outside, leather seats, and seemed so spacious to me. Shooting breaks and good feelings go together. Not that I ever went in one again, I don't think. Looking through my photos of the time, too bring back recollections. We sometimes went to a pub in the country for a drink. I remember drinking my lemonade from the bottle and bubbles going up my nose and pulling a face. The other photo is of me climbing some stairs with nothing on but my soft shoes. Mum and Dad were by now naturists, and this photograph was taken at Spielsplat in Hertfordshire, at a naturist get-together. Dad was finding his feet at work, and Mum had a part-time job in a bookies. 26, living in post-war Britain, naturists and vegetarians. They were making friends and settling down, and I was happy in my school. But it was a trek for Dad to travel to London each day. The road systems weren't like they are now, and cars not so reliable. His company offered him a flat close to his work, and best of all, close to Tottenham Hotspur football ground. They took it. Things changed when we moved to Tottenham in 1954. I was nearly 5, and I can remember arriving at our new home and feeling so excited. Dad worked for a company named BIZ, and they owned the flats. When one became vacant, it was offered to them, and as it was near work and had a park and school opposite, they were thrilled. In Harlow, I had a balcony, which gave me a view, but here we lived on the ground floor, which was even better. There were 3 blocks of flats, if you could call them blocks. Each was 3 stories high, 2 flats on each story, and they were built in a semicircle, being on the corner of 2 roads. I lived at number 13. We had a small square kitchen, a bathroom with black and white tiles, 2 small bedrooms and a sitting room. Each bedroom had a 2-bar electric heater in the chimney breast. The kitchen opened onto a huge communal garden, which was wild and unkempt. Just imagine, we had 8 horse chestnut trees, which showed their beauty throughout the year. I used to gather the conkers and take them into school for the boys to play with. I felt proud as I handed out the bulging brown paper bags, and they exclaimed, "Thanks." Out would come the string and a sharp stick to make a hole through the middle of the hardest and biggest conkers. They would be knotted on, and the game started. I always thought it pointless and painful. Somehow my fingers and thumbs always took a bashing. It's funny the things I can remember from that time, but most is forgotten. I remember the Dennises who lived in the flat adjacent, and I remember Mrs. Putnam who lived above. Her son, who was 8 years older than me, would come and visit with his family and sometimes come out into the garden. He's now Lord David Putnam, who produced many films, including Chariots of Fire. Incidentally, he lived in Southgate, which was going to be my next move when I was 10, and went to Minchenden School, which Kim, my daughter, attended for a short while. I loved living in Bruce Castle Court, so called because Robert the Bruce, who was King of Scots from 1306 to his death in 1329, and a national hero to Scotland, owned the land, but gave it up when he became king. There's a 16th century manor house sitting in the small park opposite, which is one of the oldest brick-built houses in the country. It's now a museum. I loved riding my bike, shelling peas under the trees, and playing camp in the long grass. The winters were freezing cold, and we often had snow, so on those days I helped Mum with the washing. She had a small machine with a wringer that folded inside. When the heavy sheets were clean, we'd yank them out with wooden tongs and catch the corner in between the rollers. They'd be put into the sink for rinsing, and then we'd wring them out again. What with the boiling water and possibility of getting my fingers crushed, it must have been a job Mum would rather have done by herself. But if I was around, there I was, willing hands. After the washing came the drying, and unless it was raining, winter or summer, it would be hung out. The next day Mum would be ironing and folding the clothes over the horse to air. The smell of the clean washing, Mum in her pinny, and the general homeliness often overcame me, and going back to school after lunch wasn't easy. She didn't go out to work, but worked very hard in the flat doing housework, shopping, looking after us and entertaining. Her diary tells us that friends were always popping in. Across the road was Bruce Castle Park, and this was my shortcut to Parkside Preparatory School, which taught children aged 5 to 11. The uniform was brown and yellow, brown skirt with crossover straps, cream viola blouse and a brown blazer with yellow badge. I loved it and wore it all the time. If we were going out for a walk or to the shops, Mum would say, "Pop your blazer on, dear." So I did. The small school was privately run and with just 4 classrooms was very welcoming. At first, Mum would come with me through the park, see me across the road, and then I'd run in, down a sideway and into the playground, which was a small rectangle behind a residential house. Mr. and Mrs. Hall lived there with their daughter. It was a detached house, sitting on a corner plot, and 4 of the rooms had been turned into classrooms. The garden in the front was theirs, but the yard at the back was ours to play in. It was only big enough to hold 1 class at a time, so playtime was just with friends. My first memory was sitting in a downstairs room overlooking a pretty garden, learning my ABC. The room was at the front of the house and had French windows which opened out onto the enclosed garden. It was a pretty country garden, and I can remember staring out quite a lot. We had red glossy-covered books open at a double page of pictures. We pointed to each one of the small squares and chanted the sound of the letter and what we saw. A for apple, B for boat, C for cup, D for dog, E for egg, and F for feather. The whole class went up for fe and down for the, and then started a new line. I can see myself sitting there, chanting and being lulled by the rhythm. I can remember the book, the room, the friendliness of my teacher, but that's it for my first year. My school report said Penny seems a little weary. I wonder why. Was it because I felt overwhelmed at what I had to do? I had to try and curb my natural excitement over things and sit in a desk and conform. Classrooms were quiet and formal, not like they are now. I was often told to be quiet and not to talk. My coolness was starting to disappear, teachers trying to knock me into shape. I hated this conformity and started to dislike school. The thought of having to go overwhelmed me.